Okay, so here's something that most people have completely missed. And I think it's because the people who understand it don't want you to understand it. Right now, there are two different prices for oil, not two opinions, two actual numbers. The one you see when you Google it, and the one countries are actually paying when they need a real barrel delivered to a real refinery today. That gap is $35. That is the largest spread ever recorded in human history. And the fact that you probably didn't know that until right now is exactly the problem. Let me explain what that gap actually means. The number you see online, around $100 a barrel, that's called Brent futures. It's a paper price. It's a promise. It's what traders buy and sell on screens. But if you're a country that needs actual physical oil put on an actual ship and delivered to your shore this month, you're paying $130, $140, sometimes more. That's called dated Brent. And for almost 20 years, those two numbers moved together. A dollar apart, maybe five in a real crisis. But $35? That has never happened before. Not once. And the reason that gap exists is simple. The people who actually need oil right now are paying whatever it takes to get it. Meanwhile, the paper market is sitting there acting like everything is completely fine. Why? Because someone is using that paper market as a psychological tool, a way to keep the official price low enough that the public doesn't panic. That's not a theory I invented. JP Morgan published a chart showing exactly this spread going all the way back to 2008. You can look it up. Now here's where it gets interesting. The Strait of Hormuz, the waterway that used to carry a fifth of the entire world's oil every single day, is closed. And because of that, somewhere between 8 and 13 million barrels a day are missing from the global supply chain. That sounds abstract, so let me put it in real terms. The United States alone uses about 20 million barrels a day. So we're talking about losing the equivalent of more than half of America's entire daily consumption every single day for weeks. Hi, my name is Janelle. Welcome to Janelle Decoded. Come for the finance and stay for the truth they don't want trending. The world produces about 100 million barrels of oil per day at full capacity. All the emergency alternatives combined, U.S. spare capacity, Venezuela, Canada via Pacific routes, add up to maybe 2.8 million barrels a day against a shortfall of 8 to 13 million. That math doesn't work. And the best research I could find points to mid to late April as the moment when global reserves run out completely. We are there right now. And here's something else they got wrong. We've been told for years that the United States is a net exporter of oil, energy independent, the world's gas station, but the actual numbers say something different. The U.S. imports about 6.3 million barrels a day and exports about 4.1 million. That makes the U.S. a net importer of 2.2 million barrels every single day. You cannot be a net importer of something and simultaneously be the world's supplier of it. That's not an opinion, that's arithmetic. So let's talk about what the rest of the world is already living through while American gas prices are still relatively calm. Asia got hit first. Deliveries basically stopped on April 1st. Asia sources around 80% of its oil from the Persian Gulf, and right now, only about 6% of pre-war volumes are getting through. The Philippines declared a national emergency after gas prices more than doubled almost overnight. Indonesia and Vietnam asked people to work from home to save fuel. Thailand's fishing industry, about 1% of their entire economy, started shutting down because marine fuel costs jumped 250%. Japan is slowing down bus and ferry routes. India cut LPG supply for commercial use to protect household cooking fuel. In Mumbai, roughly 20% of hotels and restaurants had already closed by early March. Africa's last deliveries stopped around April 10th. Countries like Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, and South Sudan are now literally diluting their petrol, mixing it with other chemicals just to stretch what little is left. Australia's final fuel shipment was expected around April 19th. They've already released national reserves, cut fuel taxes, and activated a national security response. Europe's deliveries stopped around April 10th as well. Their entire strategy right now is just reduce demand however possible because the cheapest energy is the energy you don't use. And the U.S.? JP Morgan says we're last in line. The final crude shipments reached Texas on April 1st and California on April 8th. That buffer is gone. The last tanker to clear Hormuz before the closure was February 28th. JP Morgan estimates that ship reaches its final destination around April 20th. That is the exact moment the pre-closure barrels are fully consumed from the global supply chain. After that date, there is no more buffer. The paper price and the physical price will have to meet. Now let's talk about why the paper price hasn't moved yet, because this is the part that should make you uncomfortable. After ceasefire talks failed, which should have sent oil prices up, they actually went down. The best explanation for that is that someone placed enormous short positions on oil right before the ceasefire announcement. An investigation has been opened. A short position in oil futures means that when the contract expires, you either close it or you physically deliver the oil. And the theory is that the ceasefire announcement may have been partially timed to give whoever placed those shorts a window to exit before the physical reality made the paper price impossible to maintain. Somebody shorted the oil market by hundreds of millions of dollars exactly 20 minutes before an official announcement that everything was going to be fine. If that happened once, maybe it's a coincidence. It's happened at least 3 times since the war began. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. When those short contracts come due and the buyers say, "Where's my oil?" there will be a forced buying event. The entity that sold those contracts will have to buy them back at whatever price the market is at that moment. If physical oil is at $130 or $140, that's what they pay. That's called a short squeeze. And it's one of the fastest mechanisms that exists for making a paper price catch up to physical reality. Now let's look at history, because this is not the first time the world has faced an oil supply shock, and it's worth understanding exactly what happened the other times. In 1973, the Arab oil embargo took about 7% of global supply offline. Oil went up 300%. The stock market dropped 52% over 23 months and took 7 years to fully recover. Inflation peaked at 12.3%. In 1990, during the Gulf War, another 7% went offline. Oil rose 75%. Stocks dropped 21% but recovered in about 4 months because the war ended quickly. Mild recession, inflation peaked at 6.3%. Now look at where we are in 2026. Supply offline is 15 to 20%, more than double either of those previous shocks. Oil futures are up over 100%, and physical oil is up over 200% from before the war. Duration so far, 7 weeks with no clear resolution. Even the mildest historical comparison, 1990, produced a 21% market correction and an 8-month recession. And today, the market is pricing in zero correction and zero recession. Luke Gromen noted something important about 1973. After the embargo was announced, markets actually went up for a few weeks. The S&P rose 2.3% right after the October ceasefire. People thought the worst was over. Then stocks fell another 40%. It took weeks for markets to price in the reality because nothing in recent history had prepared anyone for oil tripling in 6 months. There was no reference point. That same disconnect is visible right now. Wall Street is near all-time highs. The University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, which measures how regular people feel about their own financial situation, is near one of its lowest readings in decades. Those two lines have tracked each other for years. Right now, the gap between them is enormous. And historically, it has never been the person at the gas pump who was wrong about how the economy actually felt. This is also bigger than oil. Look at what's happening to fertilizer prices. The most widely used fertilizer in the world is made primarily from natural gas. And natural gas, just like oil, flows through the Strait of Hormuz. So when you close Hormuz, you're not just cutting off gasoline and diesel. You're cutting off the feedstock for the fertilizer that grows the food the world eats. The fertilizer price spike happening right now will work its way into grocery store prices over the next 6 to 12 months. We saw exactly this sequence in 2022. Energy prices rose in February. Food prices followed for the rest of the year. Now let's connect it all to the bond market, because this is where the full picture comes together. Look at the 10-year government bond yield across 5 major economies: the US, UK, Germany, Japan, and China, going back to 2008. A bond yield is simply the interest rate a government pays to borrow money. When it goes up, borrowing gets more expensive. And when you're carrying almost $40 trillion in debt, every fraction of a percentage point costs billions more in annual interest payments. Since this war started, yields in the US, UK, Germany, and Japan have all moved up. The US 10-year is sitting around 4.3%. The UK is at 5%. These are levels that create genuine stress in economies that heavily indebted. But China is different. Chinese bond yields have actually fallen since the war began. For the first time in at least 20 years, China has lower sovereign bond yields than the US, UK, Japan, and Germany simultaneously. In a crisis, money is flowing toward China as the safe haven. That is a completely different world than the one this war was supposed to create. Why does that matter to you directly? Because the US 10-year yield is the rate that everything in the American economy is priced off of. Mortgage rates, car loans, credit cards, corporate borrowing, they all follow that number. And somewhere between 4.6% and 4.8% is the threshold where the cost of servicing the national debt starts feeding on itself. Oil goes up, inflation goes up, the Fed can't cut rates, yields stay elevated or rise further, the deficit expands, more borrowing is needed, yields go higher. Economists call it a debt death spiral. And we are not far from the trigger point right now. So what was the original strategy behind all of this? The theory is that disrupting Middle Eastern oil flows and cutting off cheap supply from places like Venezuela was designed to hurt China and Russia more than the US. Starve China of cheap Gulf oil, force them to pay a premium, drain their foreign reserves, slow their economy, apply similar pressure to Russia, which was already under sanctions. Meanwhile, the US, with its shale production and military power, would reassert dominance over global energy markets. That was probably the plan. Here's what actually happened. The US burned through nearly its entire inventory of advanced cruise missiles in 5 weeks. Rebuilding that inventory requires rare earth magnets and tungsten, both predominantly controlled by China, which is not feeling cooperative. Trump's upcoming trip to China is reportedly focused on keeping those rare earth supplies flowing. And what does China want in exchange? Oil. Here's the bottom line. The physical evidence, the JP Morgan data, the bond market, fertilizer prices, 50 years of historical precedent, and the back and forth messaging that makes no coherent sense, they are all pointing in the same direction. The paper market and the official story are pointing somewhere else entirely. One side is right. And in every single prior instance in history, it has been the physical world that turned out to be telling the truth. You cannot print physical atoms. At some point, the management of perception breaks down and reality takes over. Based on everything in this video, that moment looks very close. Gas prices, grocery prices, the cost of most things, they are likely going up. I'd love to hear what you think and what you're doing to prepare. Leave it in the comments. And if you want to see how I'm personally thinking about positioning for this, there's a video linked above. As always, smash the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next week.